The anchoring effect. This is the tendency for the first piece of information you receive about something to have a disproportionate influence on every judgment that follows. You walk into a shop and the first price you see is high. Every other price in the store immediately feels more reasonable by comparison, even if none of them are actually good value. The anchor has been set, and your brain now measures everything against it rather than against any objective standard, and the adjustment away from that anchor is almost always smaller than it needs to be. This happens in salary negotiations, in how you perceive a person after hearing one thing about them first, and in how you estimate time, distance, and cost. The first number, the first impression, the first detail, these land differently than everything that comes after them, and the brain rarely goes back to recalibrate once they are in place. The bystander effect. This is the well-documented phenomenon where the presence of other people makes any individual less likely to help in an emergency. The larger the crowd, the less likely any single person is to step in. It seems counterintuitive. More people should mean more help. But what actually happens is that responsibility becomes distributed across the group, and each person assumes someone else will act. In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in New York while dozens of neighbors were aware of what was happening. Very few intervened. The case became one of the most studied examples of this effect and changed how psychologists understood group behavior. The bystander effect does not require indifference. It simply requires uncertainty about who is responsible, and in a group of strangers, that uncertainty is almost always present. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. This is the cognitive pattern where people with limited knowledge or skill in a particular area tend to significantly overestimate their own competence, while genuine experts tend to underestimate theirs. A person who has just learned the basics of a subject often feels confident and certain. A person who has spent years studying it is acutely aware of how much they still do not know. The effect is named after David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who documented it in a 1999 study. What makes it particularly relevant is that the people most affected by it are also the least equipped to recognize it in themselves, because recognizing the limits of your knowledge requires a level of knowledge you do not yet have, which means the gap between perceived and actual competence is widest at exactly the stage when a person is least able to see it. The halo effect. This is the way a single positive quality about a person can unconsciously shape your overall perception of them across completely unrelated areas. Someone who is physically attractive is often assumed to be more intelligent, more trustworthy, and more competent. Not because of any evidence, but because the brain extends the positive impression outward. The same works in reverse. A single negative quality can cast a shadow over everything else. This effect influences hiring decisions, legal judgments, teaching, and everyday relationships in ways that rarely get examined. The halo, once formed, is remarkably persistent, and most people are entirely unaware it is operating, which is precisely what makes it so consistent in its influence across almost every area of social and professional life. The sunk cost fallacy. This is the pattern of continuing to invest time, money, or energy into something simply because you have already invested a significant amount, even when the rational choice would be to stop. You stay in a film you are not enjoying because you have already watched an hour of it. You continue with a career that makes you unhappy because you spent years training for it. The past investment feels like a reason to keep going, even though that investment cannot be recovered regardless of what you do next. The only thing that changes depending on your decision is the future, but the sunk cost fallacy keeps pulling attention backward rather than forward, and the longer the original investment was, the harder it becomes to walk away from something that is no longer working. The mere exposure effect. This is the tendency to develop a preference for things simply because you have encountered them before. A song you did not particularly like the first time starts to feel familiar and pleasant after several hearings. A face you have seen repeatedly begins to feel more trustworthy than one you are seeing for the first time. Advertisers have understood this for decades, which is why repetition is so central to how products are marketed. The brain interprets familiarity as safety and, over time, as preference. You do not choose to like something more because you have seen it often. It simply happens, quietly and below conscious awareness, which is why the products you buy, the people you trust, and the ideas you find most comfortable are often simply the ones you have encountered most often. The framing effect. This is the way in which the same piece of information produces different responses depending entirely on how it is presented. A medical treatment described as having a 90% survival rate feels more appealing than one described as having a 10% mortality rate, even though these are identical facts. Food labeled as 90% fat-free seems healthier than food labeled as containing 10% fat. The content is the same in both cases. What changes is the frame around it, and the brain responds to the frame at least as strongly as it responds to the underlying information. Political messaging, advertising, and everyday conversation all exploit this effect constantly. And the unsettling part is that knowing about it provides very little protection against it. The confirmation bias. This is one of the most influential and least examined patterns in human thinking. The tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms what you already believe. If you believe a person is untrustworthy, you will notice the moments that support that belief and discount the ones that contradict it. If you hold a particular political view, the news sources you find most credible will tend to be the ones that reflect it back to you. Confirmation bias does not require dishonesty or closed-mindedness. It is a structural feature of how the brain processes new information, always filtering it through what is already there, making it genuinely difficult to update a belief even when the evidence against it is sitting directly in front of you. The scarcity effect. This is the pattern where things become more desirable simply because they appear limited or difficult to obtain. A product described as available for a limited time generates more urgency than the same product with no such restriction. An opportunity framed as rare feels more worth pursuing than one that seems perpetually available. The brain treats scarcity as a signal of value, a shortcut inherited from environments where limited resources genuinely mattered. In modern life, that same shortcut gets activated by countdown timers, limited stock warnings, and exclusive offers, most of which are designed specifically to trigger it rather than to reflect any genuine scarcity. And the response happens automatically, before conscious reasoning has a chance to evaluate whether the urgency is real. The spotlight effect. This is the tendency to overestimate how much other people are noticing you, your appearance, your mistakes, and your behavior. You spill something at a restaurant and feel certain that everyone around you saw it. You give a presentation with one stumble and assume it was all anyone will remember. But research consistently shows that other people are paying far less attention to you than you believe. They are largely absorbed in their own thoughts, their own concerns, their own version of the spotlight effect. The audience you are performing for exists primarily inside your own head, and it is considerably larger and more attentive than the actual one, which tends to have moved on from the moment far sooner than you have.